Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so very honored that you're joining us in our missions to help families grow closer through reading and to give parents the tools they need to teach their kids to be loving, respectful, and inclusive. Our guest today is Jason Sheehan. He is here today to celebrate his debut middle grade novel. It's called Children of the Flying City. Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jed. I'm glad to be here.
Jason and I were just chatting about how the pandemic has turned our lives upside down and in and out, and we're looking forward to seeing what the next chapter in life holds for us. It's an exciting time. Tell us about Children of the Flying City, please.
I would love to. This is a story about friendship and loyalty and memory and secrets. It's about three friends, Milo, Dagda, and Jules. They're orphans. They live in the city of Highgate, the flying city. And they're street kids. They make their way as pickpockets and thieves and working as shipbreakers and in factories. And they've sort of made a life for themselves this way. They've turned into their own family, and things aren't great, but they're not going terribly for them until the very beginning of the summer. The first 3 days of summer, which is the book takes place across just 3 days, when the city is put under siege by airships and waterships, and it seems that everybody is suddenly looking for Milo, looking for his friends. He has no idea why. His friends have no idea why. So it's a story about what you think you know about the world and how quickly all of that can change.
And I bet you had absolutely no idea that when this book would be published, there would be a nation under invasion.
I had no idea. That's the worst of possible coincidences I could imagine.
Yeah. Well, as you know, we're talking about that immediately. This seems to be a perfect and timely and also timeless book that families really, as you said, to me, families probably should read together with their middle grade kids, because it does, just touching on that idea that, kids' lives are turned upside down. Everyone's life is turned upside down because there's an enemy invading from the sky and from the sea and from the land.
Yeah. And it can happen in a moment. It can happen without you ever thinking that it could happen, especially with kids. And that was one of the big sort of themes of this for me as I was putting it together, was that idea, and really why I chose to do it as a middle grade book too, is it seems to me there's this sort of magical moment when kids are 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, where they're in this world, this larger world that we all live in, but they're not entirely of that world. Their lives and their concerns and their friends and what's going on at school and the things that they love are such a focal point in their lives. And the rest of what happens in the world, the rest of what happens to everybody else there is this sort of background noise that they hear and they take in, but seems less important than the things that are right in front of them. And I think that, part of aging, part of growing up is balancing those two things, the world outside and the world sort of inside. And a situation like this, is happening now with Ukraine. It's, you see all of these kids and all of these families who 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, they had other concerns. They knew that something bad was happening. They thought that something could happen, but it was less important to them than what was for dinner that night,
right?
What they were going to wear to school the next day. And that's a big part. That's one of the big themes in the book.
I have to ask, what was your reaction when you're waiting for the book to come out and the world kind of sat back and watched in horror as Russia rolled over the borders of Ukraine?
I mean, every time they would show video of the people who were evacuating and trying to get out of these cities, I couldn't help but see these three kids that I'd spent 3 years writing about, putting this book together. This sort of idea that, I think it is maybe, I don't know, peculiar to middle grade and young adult authors, this idea of like, oh, is this too much that I'm loading on my characters? Is this something that a kid could really do? Is this how a kid would really react, a 13, a 14-year-old? And then suddenly to see it playing out live on my television, like to see them making it out of these cities and surviving this siege and surviving this war and running away to another country. I mean, I don't want to give anything away. But yeah, I mean, towards the end of the book, when the war finally arrives in this city, there are moments in that, moments that I wrote 3 years ago now that are just shocking to me because I see things now on my television, on the news at night that are so similar and so horrifying. I mean, I was making up stories in my head, and to see it now in this world it's I can't imagine the nightmare it must be for these kids, for these families.
Yeah. We just had an author on that we interviewed yesterday, and just in the course of talking about his multilingual books, he shared with me that his wife is originally from Ukraine, and we dug a little deeper in that, and he shared with us that his in-laws had to jump in a taxi and drive in the taxi for 2 days to get to the Polish border. And then they waited in line in the cold for 12 hours to get across the border. Thankfully, they're here with their family in the States right now. But to think that there are literally millions of people going through that, and many of them kids going through that, is hard to fathom.
And to see your whole world turned, I mean, absolutely upside down. To not just that you're not in your home, but to see your home leveled. Not just that you have to go somewhere new, but you're going to a entirely new country where maybe they don't, you don't speak the language. You're not in your neighbor. You're not with your entire family, maybe because all of the men had to stay behind. It's, as I said, seeing it play out, on the news, it's horrifying. It's easier on a writer. So like, it's going on in my head. I can change it if I have to. This, we're all powerless.
Yeah. You mentioned the dilemma that you and many middle grade authors have is this too much? Are kids this age going to be able to handle this? And I think what we're seeing is, in some ways, a reminder of the fact that a few hundred years ago, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, their lives were much different than our kids' lives are today. And that, kids of a century or two ago were dealing with these kind of issues. So, and handling them. So right. I think any parent that's out there that's thinking, my little Johnny, my little Susie, she's not ready to handle this, probably is a lot stronger and a lot more resilient than you give them credit for.
Absolutely. I think so too. And also, I think that kids know on their own when something is too much for them. I mean, a book is easy to put down and come back to later when you are, and I mean, certainly, my own kids, they've done that with plenty of books. So, they get to a point, and if it's a little bit too much for him, suddenly I see that, he's not picking up that book at night anymore. And I'm like, oh, well, what happened? And he's like, oh, this was scary, or this got boring, or I didn't like this happening. And then maybe 6 months later, they pick it up again because it sticks with them too. It's like if there was a thing in the story that bothered them and they felt that they weren't ready for it and they put it aside, maybe there'll come a time when they do want to be able to face that. And they're, you know, they're wholly capable of making that choice on their own, I think.
Yeah. You know, you just reminded me of the fact that before my kids were born, I loved Stephen King and Anne Rice and all those horror books. And the day that my son was born, I was halfway through a Stephen King novel that was really creepy and scary. And they put that baby into my arms, and I suddenly had absolutely no interest in going back to that world.
Yeah, right. I know. Yeah, it changes. Yeah,
and I still haven't gone back there yet.
No, absolutely. There are movies, there are books, things like that I loved before I was a parent, and yeah, man, once the kids show up, it can change the things that you are willing to take in, that you can handle, and that you're willing to like sort of that you're willing to take in your entertainment.
Maybe we're hitting on something, Jason. Maybe the issue isn't really isn't parents thinking, oh, I don't think my daughter, my child is ready to handle this. It's, I don't want my kid to have to handle this. I don't want my kid living in a world where this kind of evil is taking place.
Yeah, I think a lot of it could be, you know, that it's not, oh, I don't think my kid can handle this. It's that, oh, I'm not sure if I can handle this, and I don't want to handle the questions about this, and I don't want to have those conversations. And I think that's rough, man. I think that can be a really dangerous choice to make as a parent, because, you know, years and years and years ago, I had a teacher, I think a high school English teacher probably, who told me that, who told my class that, you know, the reason that we still read Shakespeare is because Shakespeare gave us borders to tragedy, that no one is going to suffer as much as Hamlet or Lady Macbeth, or, you know, no one will love as deeply as Romeo and Juliet. And if you read these stories, they give you borders for that experience. Mm-hmm. Like, he was so extreme and so over the top, particularly for his time, that if you read this and you sort of internalize it, that you know what the borders of human experience are going to be. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing that, and it's stuck with me for a long time now. And I remember also being really bothered by that idea, that why does he get to choose? Why does either Shakespeare or my English teacher get to choose what the borders of these experiences are? I bet you I can find somebody who suffered more than Prince Hamlet. I bet I can find somebody who, you know, loved more deeply and more crazily than Romeo and Juliet. And then when I became a writer, a lot of it was, I bet I can create something. I bet I can create a character who does that, you know, and I think that bleeds into everything that I do now, all the books that I write. And it was on my mind when I wrote this one. And it is, again, it's that whole idea of, you know, how much is too much? How far is too far? How, you know, you want to tell a story, and you want it to be exciting, and you want there to be action, and you want there to be real stakes. Because I wanted this to feel like there were real stakes. These are, you know, life and death times that my characters are living through. I wanted to feel like there were life and death stakes in it. But there comes a point where, like, you can only push that too far. And the way that I dealt with that in the book is I gave the book a narrator. And the narrator has this, he's a sort of, you know, omniscient voice that hangs over the top, and he talks directly to the reader. And at a couple of points where things are getting really rough, he'll warn the reader in advance. He'll say, look, things have been X so far. Mm-hmm. Now they're going to be Y. Mm-hmm. I just want to tell you what's coming. I want you to know what, you know, I'm not giving anything away. Mm-hmm. I just want you to know where we are. Put the book down if you want to. Walk away. Your parents might be happier. You might be happier. And I promise you that Milo, Jules, and Dagda won't care. You can believe, you can make up your own ending for this story if you need to. It's okay. And I think at the couple points where I put that into the book, I think it was really important to give readers that out, kids or adults, whoever is reading this. It felt like I needed to give them that out.
Well, looking back at my 11 or 12 or 13-year-old self, if I had read that, there's no way I was putting the book down.
Yeah, I was cheating a little too. I figured when I come right out and tell you like, oh, your parents would be happier if you put the book down now. No kids put the book down. They're going to keep right on going.
Hey, why at this point in your career, and you've had a long writing career, writing for magazines and material for adults, why did you decide to write for this audience at this time?
Man, that's a good question. It actually kind of started as a dare from my agent. We were on the phone talking, just as I would often. I used to do almost all my writing. It was a coffee shop in my neighborhood that I would go to, and I would sit there for 2-3 hours a day in front of my computer. And if it was a beautiful day and I really didn't feel like writing, I would just go outside and call my agent, who had become a really good friend of mine, and bother him because I figured it was a beautiful day. He didn't really want to be working either. Mm-hmm. And we just talk on the phone, and we were talking one day about, whatever, writery stuff. What's selling? What's going well right now? And we started joking about YA and middle grade books. And he's like, I can't think of anybody in the world who would be worse at this than you. And I'm like, oh, really? I can write one of these. And he's essentially like, I dare you to write one of these. And I'm like, I'll show you. And then did. But once I got started with it, I realized that there's this incredible freedom in writing for this age. There's an incredible power in writing for this age, because as I said earlier, it's this sort of really small, really narrow, incredibly precious window where your characters live almost equally in the world and in their own heads. Mm-hmm. And they do it in a way that adults don't. They 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, they process things different than adults do. They think about things both more and less deeply and in different ways than adults do. And once I sort of got into that mindset, I mean, I had, as I was writing this, I had a kid who was my daughter who was just passing through this age, and my son who was just coming up on this age. And watching them and the way that they experience the world and move through the world and look at the world and think about the world, it was fascinating because you have all the normal storytelling, the storytelling tricks, the hero's journey and the passing through the gateways and like all that stuff you do as a writer. And then layered on top of that, you have characters that are by their very nature unreliable narrators and going to make really bad decisions and going to do things for incredibly selfish reasons that aren't necessary. And none of this makes them, none of these are moral judgments. Mm-hmm. They're just, this is how they act at this age. This is how they process. This is how they behave. This is how they interact with other people. And man, once I sort of got my head into that place and I started, I was thinking about my kids and friends' kids and God, myself when I was that age, I'm just like, this feels more like home to me than almost anything else I've ever done. Oh. Maybe I just never grew up. I've been a 14-year-old at heart my entire life. So,
well, I've been accused of that many, many times. Tell me, how did we talked about how you felt when Vince and the World unraveled right around the time your book was debuting, but before that happened, how did writing Children of the Flying City change you?
How did it? It's a harder question than I would think to answer because writing this book took an incredibly long time for me. I generally can finish a book in 6 months to a year. I've done them even faster than that. This one, this was 4 years in front of the computer, 4 years on the page before we really even got into editing and stuff like that. So over the course of those 4 years doing this, as a writer, it taught me how to be a better storyteller. It taught me how to be a more concise storyteller. It taught me 1,000 things about voice and language, because I wasn't working as, the 40 whatever year old man that I am. I was writing in the voice of 14-year-olds. So I had to learn what is essentially an entirely new language to be able to do that. And they're all the same words, but they work differently when you're talking about younger characters. It made me probably a wildly stranger parent than I would have been otherwise, because I've got this imaginary family that I'm dealing with 4 or 5 hours a day when I'm working on this book. And then I'm coming back to my real family who have very different concerns and very different things that they're dealing with. But actually, a lot of the inspiration for this came from my son, and his wildly fluctuating obsessions with video games and books and stories and whatever it was that was in front of him at any given moment. There's actually a one of the sort of props in the story that a big chunk of the story kind of turns on is a spider ring that Milo gives to his best friend Jules. He gives it to him sort of as an apology for something cruel that he said, and also because he's worried that with the war coming, he's going to lose Jules, so that Jules is going to, run off and join an airship crew or flee the city without him. And he's worried that he's never going to see him again. So he gives him this ring to remember him by. And all of that came out of one day when I'm sitting there and I'm typing away at the laptop, and I was in a bad mood, and it wasn't going well. And to make me feel better, my son, Maddox, he had like one of those little plastic black spider rings that you get like around Halloween, you give out as like Halloween, and he gave it to me. And I'm like, that, which was just the number one, the absolute sweetest thing in the world. And number two, it just hit me at this perfect moment when I needed a thing and I needed an emotion and I needed like something to hang this interaction on. And it became this spider ring, and I went back and it worked seamlessly into the story, and it became a really, really important part of the book. And it was all just this sort of 30-second interaction with my son. That to him was just like, Dad's having a bad day. Oh, cool, a spider ring. Yeah. And then he brings it to me.
Well, just another example of how little actions can make a huge difference in other people's
Absolutely.
lives. Yeah.
Absolutely.
As we're talking, and hopefully a peace has come to Ukraine by the time this is being published in a few days from now. But even if it has, our 10, 11, 12-year-olds, they've been through a lot over the past couple of years. If your kid is 10 or 11 years old, he or she has spent 20% of their life under some sort of lockdown. And they've seen the world come to the brink of maybe a third world war. And even if you're not talking to your kids about this, they're talking about it with their friends. And you really want to be the one talking about it. Even if you're scared to talk about it, you need to be the one talking to your kids about these issues. And I think that the Children of the Flying City would be a great place to start, to sit down and I usually encourage families to co-read a book together with their middle grade kids. But I think that this is something that would be really beneficial for a family to read aloud together with their middle grade age kids. I think the discussions that would come from it are really important and can be really comforting and reassuring.
I think so too. Yeah. And there's, the audiobook of it, is just, you can sit and listen to it. I had a great narrator for the audiobook who has a much sweeter voice than mine. So he did a great job with it. But no, I absolutely agree. There, like I said, there are definitely some heavy things that happen in this book. There's, it's got some violence in it, both on a personal level and on a grand level. It has some really serious questions about family and loyalty and keeping secrets. What kind of secrets do you keep when you think you're protecting somebody by keeping things secret from them? Mm-hmm. All of these things which could be discussed. And then, as you said, this idea of, all the kids out there who've lived through these last 2 years, they are, in a way, all of us are like these kids. Mm-hmm. We're living in this time where we are surrounded by sort of, bad things happening on all sides, and you can ignore them if you want, but they don't go away. Right. They're still there. And just the fact of them being there is stressful and causes anxiety. Mm-hmm. And by facing up to them, talking about them, discussing how they make you feel and what that's done to you over 2 years of this, I think can be really helpful. And if the book can do that, great. I mean, otherwise it's just a great adventure story. But if there's something in it that touches you or triggers a question in you, that's great. I think that would be fantastic if it could be used as a way for people to discuss these things.
Yeah. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about both the print and the audio version of your book, and also find out more about Jason Sheehan.
They can actually, it's weird. I actually do not have a huge presence online. I don't have a website for the book. I am on Twitter. Jason_Sheehan. I talk about books there a lot, but because of my other life as a restaurant critic and a book and video game writer, I keep sort of a low profile online, because I was a critic for a really long time, and that's sort of what we did. But yeah, I mean, the book is available everywhere. You can find me on Twitter if you want to, or if you have to. But yeah, I don't actually have a website for it or anything like that. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should get one of those.
They're new. I don't know if it's going to be around for a long time.
It's this internet thing. It's this new, all the kids are talking about it.
We've had a really, I think this has been a really meaningful conversation. And hopefully it's going to encourage families to start talking about some things that they might feel uncomfortable talking about. But I think after they do, it'll draw them closer together as family. And we've been talking to the author of Children of the Flying City, the debut middle grade novel by our guest, Jason Sheehan. Hey, Jason, thanks so much for spending time with us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Matali Perkins. She'll be here to celebrate Bear Tree and Little Wind, a story for Holy Week. That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Jason Sheehan. Please be sure to check out Children of the Flying City. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.